I feel like diet culture sets you up to never be good enough.
Did you burn 500 calories on the treadmill today? No? Me either.
I mean, anybody can sit with us. We're just really not about diet culture.
But literally, happiness doesn't come from a low-calorie, high-intensity life. I actually do like carrots.
I do too. They're my favorite.
Welcome to the Fit Fueled Free podcast.
So basically, diets suck. Hey guys, welcome to episode 62. I'm Jenna.
I'm Danielle.
And today we are on Intuitive Eating Principle 6 out of our 10-part mini-series where we are covering the 10 principles of intuitive eating. So today, the principle that we are covering is Feel Your Fullness. And I'm going to start by reading off the little blurb that is given at the beginning of each principle chapter. So, in order to honor your fullness, you need to trust that you will give yourself the foods that you desire. Listen for the body signals that tell you that you are no longer hungry and observe the signs that show that you're comfortably full. Pause in the middle of eating and ask yourself how the food tastes and what your current hunger level is. And so for many dieters who are doing this for the first time, honoring your fullness can seem and sound super scary because we've been taught for so long that we essentially shouldn't really ever feel full because that means we've ate too much. And so many of us have spent so much time ignoring that and not allowing ourselves to get full for the fear of like what eating to actual fullness will do to our bodies physically, because there's a lot of like congruency with like fullness and overeating. And that's not true, but that's what we've been told. And that's how we've kind of dictated our eating choices. Never letting ourselves really feel fullness because that seems scary. That feels too much. And that feels like we've overate.
Yeah. So I feel like there isn't a ton of explanation on this one before diving into action tips.
Yeah. I agree.
Is there anything else you want to particularly touch on with this before we get into it?
Not really. I mean, it talked about like the Clean Plate Club, but we touched on that a lot in an earlier principle episode.
Yeah. I think the only thing that I wanted to add before we dive in was that just like hunger can feel like such a dirty word, fullness, like you were saying, really can stir up a lot for someone. So like that guilt and shame, the need to compensate for it, or even a false sense of what full is, because like we like couldn't dare to let our bodies be nourished, because we don't feel like we should. And so when we're in this cycle of restriction and then dieting or restriction, binging or like whatever that is for you, like fullness is so longed for by our bodies that oftentimes we kind of overshoot it because we don't have that like middle ground. And that's part of what intuitive eating is like getting off of the like far left and far right and coming back to center, for yourself. So if this sounds scary, that's normal.
Yeah. And I think also to like distinguish the difference between like, we're not talking about like, we referred to the food scale in a couple of episodes ago. Like, we're not talking about like getting to past the point of fullness where you're uncomfortably full, which I think is what a lot of people associate fullness with. They don't, there's no difference between like, oh, I'm comfortably full and I'm satisfied. That they don't think that there's a difference between that and like feeling the most common example I can think of, and also because next week is Thanksgiving, is like that sometimes uncomfortably full feeling that you will get after a Thanksgiving meal if you do eat more than you typically do, because there's foods and family and experiences that you only really get once you're at Thanksgiving. We're not talking about eating to that like Thanksgiving fullness, for lack of a better description, every time you eat. And I think that's why it feels so overwhelming, because people are like, well, I don't want to eat till I'm uncomfortably full. And it's like, well, good. Like, we're not telling you to do that. That's not what it means to feel your fullness. You know, we're talking about like feeling like your stomach being content and feeling satisfied and like a pleasant completeness, not oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going to throw up because I just ate so much. And I think that's important to remember as we're talking about honoring your fullness in this episode, because we're not telling you to eat until you're uncomfortably full every time you eat. Like that's not the message here.
Right. And so if we're thinking about that scale, so I know we talked about a hunger scale. I actually like to do them as two separate scales because I don't think everyone necessarily experiences like 5 as neutral, and then like all there, I think there's more to that scale, and especially as you become more connected with your body again. But like, to describe that sensation, I would say comfortably full, at least for me, would be like probably like a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10, and I could take a few more bites without feeling sick, but I don't necessarily feel the need to do so. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I go to like a 7. Sometimes I accidentally land higher than that, because it's something that like I'm not paying attention, or it's something I haven't eaten before, and it just like unexpectedly hits me, and I just wasn't prepared. But typically where you are going to want to land for most like level of comfortability is somewhere between like a 5 and a 7, I would say, for like hunger and fullness, like on both of those scales. And that's why I don't think it's a perfect continuum. And that wasn't my own original idea. I learned this somewhere, and I agree with it for sure.
Yeah. So action steps, we kind of talked about this in principle 5, but just being very conscious or mindful of your eating experience if you can, and if removing distractions is going to be something that helps you. Don't speed through it so that you can turn into your cues, and also pausing in the middle of a meal or a snack, kind of like for like a mini timeout. And it's not a commitment to stop, but it's simply a time that you're giving yourself to, okay, put your fork down, pause, and check in with your body, see where you're at. And again, if you need to like keep a journal for this at the beginning, that's where that can come into play as well. But just kind of like potentially using that scale to be like, okay, where am I at? Like, just so you can be aware of like, okay, I'm going to continue to eat, or I'm going to continue like, or I'm going to stop. But that can be a tool that you can utilize to just kind of check in and see where your body is at and be present. And also like a taste check and like see how the food is tasting, or if you're even enjoying it, like what we talked about in the previous episode.
Yeah. And so like, it's just an opportunity to get feedback from your body, not a rule.
Correct.
And that's super important to just like reiterate, I feel like 100 times throughout this whole process of explaining intuitive eating. Because like, it's probably not realistic to sit down with every single meal and snack of the day to do that, but maybe put your journal at the place where you eat breakfast or lunch or whatever, and then try and do that every day. And once you've started to learn some, maybe switch to a different eating time, because it's probably going to be different at different times of the day. But don't feel like you have to be like assessing all the time, but see if you can make it a practice so that you can actually get some data from it. And I think everyone's going to need a different length of time to practice it before you start to realize like what your body is feeling and really needing.
The book talked about discovering your last few bites threshold, which is the growing awareness that you're just a few bites from fullness. And it was saying like, don't feel obligated to leave food on your plate. But I was curious as to what your thought with that is, if you feel like that's can also be like diet culture's tricky way of getting in there, like by saying don't feel obligated to like leave food on your plate, or like don't feel obligated to like finish. Do you feel like the last bite threshold could or is a useful tool, or do you think it just depends on the person?
I think it depends. There's actually like a lot of the information about overeating, I feel like, is more likely to be rooted in diet culture than not eating enough. And they can definitely go hand in hand, like we talk about all the time. but I feel like the conversation around like overeating is it's very like our brain automatically goes to, if I eat too much, I'm going to gain weight, therefore I'm fat, therefore I'm bad, because we have this fat phobic society. And so I just like get this vibe sometimes when I read through things about how to help someone who is used to overeating. And I genuinely wonder if this is me projecting in some way, because I did have the type of eating disorder where I was binging. Like, so you and I had very different experiences with that. And there's typically like a stigma with like someone who has bulimia or who binges and purges, whatever, like is like a failed, like you couldn't starve yourself. Like it's in the eating disorder realm, like it can have that stigma, right? And so, and I fully know like they both are bad things. You don't want one over the other. You aren't superior for one over the other, like all that. I'm fully like rationally aware of that. But I wonder sometimes if I'm like triggered by that because of the fact that that was my eating disorder. But I think that might be a small percentage, but I really like think that there's fat phobic. It's not written in there, but it's part of it. Like that's my intuition.
Yeah.
Do you sense that at all? Like sometimes when you hear that stuff, like I know you're not trained as a dietitian, but like.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Yeah, I do.
And so I think like it's something I question it because there's varying opinions around it depending on who you ask, like even in the, like legit eating disorder world.
Yeah.
But anyway, like that's just kind of explaining where I'm coming from. But I think it could seem very much like a useful marker of progress, and to say like, oh, I left 3 bites on my plate, I'm doing intuitive eating, I'm feeling comfortably full. But I really just believe that's a lingering diet culture behavior, because like you don't have to leave food on your plate unless you're full.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily over portion for yourself on your own. Like everyone's going to have a different experience with that. And so I think what's assumed here is that we're putting too much food on our plates.
Yeah.
But like, unless you're being served by someone else, or like you're at a restaurant with big portions, which it just depends like where you go, and then, or like if you're having a new meal for the first time, so you have no idea like how much you need of it, that makes more sense that you may end up leaving food on your plate. But I feel like that can easily become a rule.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that gets really dangerous, because then it can become satisfactory to be like, ooh, like I exercise self-control by not getting uncomfortably full because I visually see these bites on the plate. And that's like, that's not what it's about. So that particular thing makes me nervous.
Yeah.
So I think where I would say is just go back to your fullness scale. And like I described, being able to have a few more bites is where I'm comfortably full, just like call it that. Rather than thinking of it as leaving food on your plate per se. I just think that's a little bit more positive and less dangerous.
Yeah. I like that.
And also, it is okay to eat past comfortable fullness, as long as it's not because you feel out of control. Well, like you're not bad if you feel like this, but if you constantly feel out of control and that's why you're eating more than you're comfortable with, like literally your body.
Yeah.
Or isn't, or if it's leading to like compensatory actions, like that's an issue. But like sometimes you're going to make that choice. Like Jenna said, on Thanksgiving, likely most people are going to push themselves. Although if you are an intuitive eater, you might not as much because you know that you can have all that stuff at any time. It's just not as like traditional, but technically you can. So like it's not off limits. So I do think that affects it. It has for me personally anyway. But it's okay to eat like more than, it's not like a sin, like it's not bad. It just, if it's chronic, it can become harmful to your well-being.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about increasing awareness of your like growing fullness as
Yeah.
you're eating a meal.
Yeah.
Um, so for eating without distraction, I said last episode I would talk more about this here because what came to my mind immediately was I grew up eating in front of the television most of the time, unless I was with like my grandparents or like extended family. And today I'm still able to honor my fullness while watching TV, like after practicing intuitive eating for long enough. But like back then, um, definitely not. I wasn't paying any attention whatsoever. And so we do eat in front of the TV a good amount of times. And sometimes I just get this sense of like, I just need to like come back to my body. It's not necessarily because I'm worried that I'm not being intuitive. Sometimes it is because you can definitely get in habits that kind of derail you. But and not from your diet, but just from being connected to your body, just to clarify. But anyway, if I like get that sense that I want to come back to myself a little bit and create that less distracting environment, I like to like dim the lights. I hate like bright overhead lights. It really like is
Yeah.
like overload sensory wise for me. Light some candles, turn on a little bit of chill music, and that's like my vibe for
Yeah.
just like sitting down and really enjoying food and likely conversation with my husband. When I'm like in a hurry, I feel like dinner is the main time that I feel like I can slow down with food just because of like my day to day. But like if I'm standing up eating like waffles for breakfast, um, which I typically just will eat like chocolate chip waffles. Like that's a common thing I do. And I don't like eat it with syrup and butter just because I don't like that with chocolate chip waffles. So I'm just painting the picture for you. So I'll be standing there, like just standing, like eating this waffle. And sometimes I'm like, what are you doing right now? And then I'll like close my eyes. And every time I do that, I learned that from a mindfulness exercise with food, and it literally just enhances the taste of the food. Like, and I just try to like take a deep breath and like come back to what's going on. And those are probably like my two like real life examples of coming back to my body to increase awareness of like what I'm feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super helpful. Some other things that they were saying were to like reinforce your conscious decision to stop. And I think it's also important to make sure that this is also not rooted in diet culture. I think I don't know if you felt the same way, but as I was reading this, I was like, these could very easily become rules again.
Yeah, I don't like this one either. And like we're not trying to like shit on the authors of intuitive eating, but I think again everyone's experience is a little bit different. So like that's why we're doing this series. I don't like this rule because I specifically used this as a behavior
Yes.
um to stop eating. I would
Yeah.
put my dirty napkin on my food.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As a rule, and be like, oh, I can't touch it anymore, even if I decide 5 minutes later I want some.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
like I get where it's coming from, but if you are in that place already, I feel like that's danger.
Yeah.
I would say it would be better to like get up and walk away for a second to like go get some fresh air or something than to do that.
Yeah.
If you need to remove yourself rather than because it could super easily become one of those things like, I like ate too much yesterday. Like, I don't need any more of this. Like, all you need is, and I'm not saying it's going to cause a spiral, but all you need is one diet culture thought to stick and for you to act on it. You can choose not to go further, but you can also choose to just go right back to all
Mhm.
that disordered stuff and
Mhm.
diet behavior. So it's not my favorite tip, but I get where
Yeah.
they're coming from, but I probably would not tell someone to do that.
Yeah. Um, they also recommended like just kind of reminding yourself that like you are the one in charge. And so it gave the example of like having like an overly pushy aunt or like, someone that you're eating with who is trying to like push like obligatory eating on you. which is also something that's probably easier for you to distinguish as you become more confident in your ability to like discern where you're at in terms of your fullness. But like just having the courage to like stand up for yourself and like genuinely say like no thank you if you truly do not want something, and just remembering that like no one has the ability to push or force anything on you, except for you. Like you're the one in charge, and that can just be like a way to increase your awareness in a situation where you feel like, you know, there's competition with food, which we talked about in one of the very earlier episodes of these principles, or just feeling like pressured into something regardless of how you are feeling internally with your hunger.
Yeah. I have worked with people before who felt like they weren't able to even touch intuitive eating because they had like cultural family situations where stuff was being pushed on them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you would be blown away by what happens if you just ask, like separate from that mealtime. Like it could be absolutely terrifying, but like just say like, hey, like would you be okay if I portion my food, because like that would help me with blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all you have to do, and it isn't even like we've catastrophized it into becoming this like, I mean, sometimes people may not respect you, and that's, you know, when you might have to get a little sassier. But if you just be honest, most of the time people who care about you are going to like, oh, okay, like sorry I didn't realize that before. Like it's not always, but it could happen. So I would encourage you to even like preemptively address those situations, to avoid having to put yourself where you feel like you're disrespecting someone.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so how much you need to eat or you do eat can definitely be influenced by a lot of things outside of just that individual meal. So like one thing is how much time has passed since you ate last, like how hungry are you? Like we've talked about, if you like eat a super light breakfast, like skip lunch, you're likely going to eat this insane dinner and then dessert and then like a snack. Like it just keeps going because your body can't be satisfied because it's snowballed into like it doesn't trust you because you didn't feed it all day. And that's like that restriction binge thing that happens all the time. It's literally because you haven't been eating. And that's a very easy thing that can disconnect you from like honoring your body when you're satisfied, because you're probably going to eat quicker too if you're overly hungry, and then it's just a lost cause. And it doesn't mean you failed, it's just like it happened, and just move on, because there's nothing you're really going to be able to do about it, I don't think, in that moment.
Also like macros are going to influence your food intake by like their contribution to the total amount of the food energy in your stomach. And I don't mean macros in terms of like how many grams of carbs you're eating, how whatever, like if you're not counting macros, but literally like how proteins, carbohydrates, and fats are macronutrients. Like the amount of each of those individual macronutrients that you have in your stomach already are going to affect your hunger level and your fullness level as well, depending on the ingredients and the nutrients and the micronutrients that are already in your body.
Yeah. So we've talked before about how eating fiber-rich foods and protein together can really help you to feel fuller longer, because it's going to slow the digestion down and it's going to stabilize your blood sugar. So it's going to be more useful energy. And so that's like pairing those foods together strategically can be really helpful, to be honoring your body. And like technically that's even getting into the gentle nutrition, which comes at the end of all this. I also want to point out, if you're feeling hungry like every hour or two, you may not be eating enough at your meals and snacks. Like that's a pretty good sign, because that's very frequent. And so some people do literally eat like every hour of the day. I wonder if that is someone being afraid of feeling overly full.
Yeah.
Disordered behaviors or an eating disorder past or present. So just a curiosity to like listen in and want like just see about that, if that could change it, experiment with it, because that's probably going to get in your way if you were that hungry all the time.
Yeah. I want to talk about social influence because we kind of already talked about like your initial hunger level.
Absolutely. So we all know that when we eat around other people, things are going to be a little bit different. And a big thing is like food is a very big community thing. So like typically we plan get-togethers around food. Like that's very normal. And so again, like try and observe your needs, and it's okay to say no. I even think about this on the flip side. So like as becoming an intuitive eater and realizing that like I'm very prone to my blood sugar dropping pretty quickly if I don't eat regularly, I need to bring snacks with me because most people don't eat as often as I do. And unless I'm like hardcore distracted, which is not a good thing, I'm gonna start to suffer. And so I've realized like I need to be proactive and make sure I have food available, because otherwise like I'm depending on other like outside cues that isn't helping me feel my best. And I want to say, especially like in situations where people are drinking and they're not paying attention to eating, like just like be aware of that. And so like I feel like my best friend Rachel, shout out, has even picked up on this, because I feel like she started to like pack snacks and stuff and like have them around, because she knows like when she's with me, like I'm gonna lose my mind if I don't eat every like 3 to 4 hours, because my body just doesn't deal. So it's not just about saying no, it's about saying yes to food. And if not everyone else is participating in that, because that's not their thing, you need to have like get something for yourself.
Yeah.
Even if it's just like a bar that you can keep on you or pack with you.
Also with like being aware, you need to be aware of fake fullness. So when we say this, we mean and are referring to foods that are going to technically fill up your stomach, but they in reality offer little sustenance. So it's low energy foods that are very pushed sometimes by diets and diet culture, like popcorn. Not that there's anything wrong with popcorn. I love popcorn, but like if you're only eating it because it's low in calories and it makes you feel full, like that's going to be a fake fullness for you. Rice cake, like calorie-free vegetables, fat-free crackers. And again, like there's nothing inherently wrong with these foods, but they can trick your body unless you eat like an astronomical, substantial amount, which in that case, like eating cups and cups of vegetables, fiber-wise, is going to make you feel crappy anyways.
Disordered 100%. I don't care.
Just to trick your body. Exactly. Yeah. So just being aware of that. And if those are like habits and tendencies that you have, maybe challenging them as well. Because that's a way to still restrict, because they're such low in calorie. And if you're doing it to make yourself feel full when in reality they don't give you much energy in terms of like calories, it's not substantial.
Yeah, people literally used to ask me this all the time when I had to do weight loss. What can I eat when I'm hungry so it doesn't give me calories and make me gain weight? And I freaking hate that question. But that's the answer. Like that's it. So eat the popcorn with some freaking butter on it. Like me and Jenna were eating popcorn with chocolate chunks in it, watching The Bachelor like forever ago, and that was great. Like it was satisfying. Put a bunch of nut butter on your rice cakes and then eat a fruit or like something on the side with it, or put cream cheese on it with a vegetable. Don't eat vegetables just by themselves. That does not count as nutrition. Dip them in something, eat them as part of a meal. Fat-free crackers are dumb. And then vegetables, eat them, but again, not by themselves. So like that is 100% always going to be diet culture. I feel like there are a few times where like maybe you're craving that, you're not like super hungry and you want that. Okay, fine. If that's truly intuitive, but if that's like a common pattern, I'm watching you, because that's not right.
So in turn, like the opposite of that is snack on foods with like staying power. So it's meals with like a little bit of fiber, a complex carbohydrate, protein, and some fat, because that's going to keep you full. That's going to help increase your satiety.
So like there's this thing of like people think it's only okay to eat salad if it's like with like one of those 0-calorie dressings or like straight up balsamic vinegar and just vegetables, but like don't do that. Like eat the greens. If they can be mixed, that's great. Iceberg lettuce is not a useless vegetable. Like stop, like it's fine. Even if it's nothing else, even if it were, which is not true, it's water, which is a macronutrient and you need it. So forget that. I'm thinking like fall salad, put some winter squash on it, like some chicken, a fat-based dressing, aka not 0 calories and not fat-free and not balsamic vinegar, and then like maybe some dried fruit or nuts or maybe cheese or all of the above, like avocado, like pile the crap on, because that's like the sustenance of it. The vegetables are just like added benefit and some fiber, and it will contribute to fullness, but without those other parts, like you're going to be hungry in 5 seconds. So yeah, our culture demonizes filling foods, but when we leave these things off constantly, we're not satisfied, we're deprived, we're not getting full, and then it's going to lead to like that overeating issue in the future. Yeah, so that's what I got about fullness.
Same.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for listening today. We have recorded 2 episodes today, and apparently I can't talk about this stuff for over an hour without getting overly sassy by the end of it. Please send any questions, comments, concerns to our Fit Fueled Free direct messages or email fitfueledfree@gmail.com. Follow us for just keeping up with what we've got going on, additional anti-diet tips throughout the week. My personal page is Dietitian Dani Cast, and Jenna's is Jenna Fit. We always appreciate ratings and reviews, and we love you guys, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.